Before stitching the neck seam closed, you want to double check that your collar is centered by measuring from the collar edge out to the seam. This is 1 1/8, and I'm going to take and do measure the other side and adjust it if necessary. So 1 1/8. It was, one side was a little off, and what I did was I unpinned it and moved the collar that 1/8 of an inch until it was centered. So you need to make sure that this collar is centered from the seam that you've sewn here. All right, so now you have that pinned. Next, you want to make sure and find the center point of the facing. So I'm taking the facing, folding it in half, aligning the seams, the shoulder seams, finding the center point, and now we can add that center point and lining up with the pin at the center of the neck. The collar, line those up, pin it, and then you continue pinning the facing down to the shirt layer and the collar layer. So you're pinning all of those layers together, and then after you have it pinned, you will stitch it at 1/2 inch. Here is a point that you want to make sure that you're lining up the shoulder seam of the shirt to the shoulder seam of the facing. The collar will be in the middle of that, but you can double check that with a pin by putting the pin right through the seam, and it comes out on the seam of the shirt. It's quite thick, my pin's bending. So now you start, and you're going to sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance from this edge, and you'll stitch around the neck edge through all the layers at 1/2 inch, and then you grade that neck edge. So the facing will be, it'll be graded just like the center front edge, where the facing will be trimmed down to 1/8 of an inch, and then the shirt edge will be trimmed down to 1/4 after you stitch the 1/2 inch seam.